All right. Hi guys. So I got a little extra themed for today's lesson on how to tell the identity of a body if you only have the skeleton. It's kind of, we're going to work on a couple things you could pick out. You actually are going to have questions over this video and I'm giving you the answers. So make sure you have open your assignment for this week while you're listening and you should be getting some answers. And I have my husband Brock.
Hi.
Here just to kind of demonstrate the first thing that I want to show you. The first thing I want to show you is that you can usually tell if a skeleton is a male or a female based on two main parts. Now, if you don't have these parts in the skeleton, like you only found their arm, then you probably can't tell if it's a boy or a girl. But if you have the skull or if you have the pelvis, then you should be able to tell if it's a boy or girl, either one of having those parts. If you didn't know, most of the time when you find a skeleton, you don't tend to find the whole thing because animals drag it off and things like that. So if you have one of those two parts, you should be able to tell if you're looking for a missing female or missing male. So I'm gonna kind of point out some parts in the skeleton that should be different for a male, and then I'm just gonna have a little show and tell with our faces, because you can actually, I do this in class, I point out boys and girls, and it's pretty easy to tell from just staring at our face how our skulls would look different underneath, which is a little weird to think about, but works. So this is a male's skull, or it's supposed to be, it's not a real male skull, but it's supposed to mimic a male skull. And the first thing that is usually different is they have a more square jaw. So you can kind of already tell that mine is a little square. I have a slightly masculine face, as I'll kind of point out those in a second, but they tend to have a more masculine skull here. The next big thing that sticks out is their brow ridge. So you can see their brow ridge sticking out. That's actually one of the first questions that I say, like, what is the most masculine part about my skull? I actually do. You can see that mine sticks out, and I would generally find a girl in the classroom that doesn't stick out at all, and there's usually several, because it's a pretty female characteristic to be very, very flat, to have a very flat brow ridge, but usually males stick out quite a bit. This last part that is usually really obvious is this bump. So if you're seeing this here, this is called the occipital bone back here. So the occipital bone just sticks out more for a male on average. So I'm gonna have us demonstrate here for a second. So if we were looking at me and my husband's face, again, this is what I said is like, this is more masculine for me. Mine does stick out. I do have a brow ridge, but Brock, get closer. See how his sticks out a lot more? So like you can definitely see the bumps in his brow ridge. He probably gets annoyed with how often I tell him that he has a masculine brow, but he does. He has a masculine brow. And then we turn to the side. Okay. You can see how a little bit, Caden's was here, his sticks out a lot more. But he has a bigger bump right there, whereas mine is really small. I have like a really small head anyways, but it just goes straight down. And kind of another thing is you'll notice that men tend to have a flatter, longer head, so just generally a bigger head, whereas women tend to be more rounded and just go up and straight down, whereas theirs is more flat. And that's it. So Brock can go do other things if you want. And I'm gonna keep moving on. Thank you. Okay, so if you don't have the skull, the next part you can use, like I said, was the pelvis. So I'm going to point out a couple things about a pelvis. Again, I only have a male replica here. They don't really sell female ones, but I'm going to point out the parts about this male replica of a pelvis that are characteristic of males. So first part is you have it put together. She knows how to tape mine together to get it to stay, but it is together now. This is called the subpubic arch right here. So the subpubic arch, if it is less than 90 degrees, so let's remember what that means. This is 90 degrees, so like that perfect square. If it's less than 90 degrees, an acute angle, then it's probably a male. Okay, so I am saying probably for these because like I said, we all have slightly masculine characteristics or slightly female characteristics, even if you might not be a female or a male, but on average, they're gonna have a smaller subpubic arch there. Okay, whereas a female's is going to be at least 90 degrees or bigger. I think we could all guess why. Females can have childbirth, so it's going to need to be wider. They're going to have to have wider hips. The second part is if you look at it on the inside like this. Okay, so we're looking on the inside this circle. This is another question I asked you. What bone did I forget to bring from school? Because I knew I was going to have to talk about the pelvis. I forgot the coccyx. So this purple piece of paper is supposed to be pretending to be the coccyx that I accidentally left at home. It's your tailbone. So it attaches to your sacrum. So we have our iliums right here. We have our sacrum in the middle, so your sacrum is in the back, and then the coccyx would stick on the bottom. Now, for a female, the sacrum actually tilts more back. So you can kind of see, if I'm looking straight down, see how the sacrum turns inward, like it turns into the pelvis area, and so does the coccyx, like it's blocking this whole area. Well, that's because males don't have to go through childbirth or can't go through childbirth, so there's no reason to have a big open cavity there. For a female, her sacrum is going to be shorter and wider. It's going to not tick up like this. It's going to either be more flat or actually tick back. And the same thing with the coccyx. It's going to be shorter, so much shorter than this, wider, and it's definitely not going to point into the pelvis, because then it'd be in the way of trying to have childbirth. So it's going to poke out, having a much more wide berth for birth. Like, that is pretty obvious, but those are things you can tell from a pelvis. Okay, last thing, let me make sure, let me check my notes. Okay, yes, so the last thing that I want to just quickly point out, you are going to learn more stuff about the skeleton, but these are like the highlights of easy things you could calculate, is how to try to determine height. Okay, so you can try to determine height based on the long bones in your body. So if you find in a skeleton your, oh my gosh, the humerus, I just forgot the bone, your humerus, your ulna or your radius, which are in here, there's 2 bones in there. You can find your femur, I'll stand back so you can actually see it. So here's your femur, your big leg bone sticking out right there, or your fibia or your tibia, which I have one of those that goes into your calf, right? Okay, so any of those long bones, if you have them, you could try to calculate for height, and they have formulas for whichever bone you have to calculate for height. So I'm gonna give you an example. This is another question in your work this week, is how tall is Ms. Castleberry supposed to be based on this calculation? So normally we would do a lab, and we would all try to do this by measuring. You sit down and you measure from kind of where your hip bone is down to right before your knee starts, trying to get the measure of your femur, and then you do this calculation. So what it says is, for a female, it is different for females or males. And here it is. So you take your femur length, it's always in centimeters, we don't use inches, and then it's times 2.21, and then after you've times those 2 numbers together, you just tack on 61.41 centimeters, and that's your height in centimeters. Now obviously we'd have to convert that to inches for us to understand it and the way we think about height, but that's what you do. So I did that for mine. My femur is 50.8 centimeters long, times 2.21, then plus 61.41, and I got 173 centimeters tall. That in our height is 68 inches, and that is 5'8". Now, so that's what my height is supposed to be based on this calculation. It's 5'8". Now I wanted to say, if you were having a missing persons and you found a femur and you calculated height from it, you would then go looking for a missing persons matching that height, but you wouldn't just type in 5'8", because this is an average formula. Like, this is not like I'm definitely 5'8", because we're all unique and different, and not all of us have the same size legs and are proportional and things like that. I would say for myself, I have really long legs. I don't have a long torso though at all. So this makes it seem like, because they only had my leg bone, that I'd be really tall. Well, not really tall, just a little above average, 5'8". But I'm actually only 5'6". So I'm like kind of right on average, like 5'5.5", 5'6". So this makes it seem like I'm taller than I am with this calculation, but that's because my leg bone is really long. But my rest of me did not get that height in my genetic train. Now I did it for my husband as well. I tried to measure his leg, and I got this calculation here. So you can see, if you're a boy at home and want to try to do this calculation, it is a little different. So it's just slightly different numbers, multiply by 2.23, and then you tack on 69.08. Now for him, his leg bone is actually, it seems to be a little shorter than mine, which I expected. He's a little more proportionate, or maybe even kind of the opposite, to where his torso is longer than his legs. So if I calculate his, it makes him 5'9", and he's actually 5'10". So it actually makes him seem a little shorter if I use the calculation. But again, we are all different. We're not put together the same way. So his legs are a little shorter, his torso is a little longer. So he's actually taller than this makes him seem by doing the leg calculation. Okay. I think that's it. Yeah. So what do you think? Did my skeleton make up? All right. Thank y'all. Y'all have a good week.